Good afternoon, good evening. Not sure which it is at this time of day. Probably good afternoon. Thank you for coming. I'm in Sapiro, but you'll get a proper introduction to me a little bit later. But my first job today is to introduce these three people and also Edie, who's hiding up there. So Henry, Donatella, Catherine, and Edie, who are four liberal arts students in the second year of their program, who have been working with me on thousands, it doesn't quite say it there, but thousands of, well, hundreds, over 1,000 pages of script for Girl Crazy. Henry's going to talk a little bit about what they're going to do today, and then you're going to get some readings of a bit of a reconstruction of some of the script for Girl Crazy, or some of a script for Girl Crazy. I won't say the script for Girl Crazy. I'm going to shut up now and let them get on with it.
How do you do, partner? I'm Henry, the MC who will introduce tonight's presentation for you. Our project is called I Got Rhythm, I Got Music, I Got Pages and Pages of Script. We are working with Dr. Ian Sapiro, a researcher from the School of Music, who you've just heard introduce us, to reconstruct the most faithful script we can of the 1930s Broadway musical, Girl Crazy. The Gershwin musical blends cowboys and big city folk with famous musical numbers and chaotic plot lines. Aside from working to piece together the pages and pages of script, we were also interested in what we'd find in the Broadway script content-wise and representation-wise. So we decided that we wanted to examine the evolution of the script in terms of these socio-cultural elements. For example, its treatment of women, and compare it in these terms to the more modern, published Tams Witmark script from the 1950s. This is reflected in our program notes, which should have been handed out to you. If you're watching online, please scan the QR code on the screen to see the program notes. We decided that our objectives would be to reconstruct a few scenes from the musical using the archival material we have access to from the Schubert Archive in New York. We then picked two of these scenes to read out for our presentation tonight according to practicability, as we are not literally recreating the same theatrical performance and have limited actors and resources. We employed multiple methods to accomplish our aims. Firstly, we sorted through 100 of uncatalogued script pages, identifying annotations, color differences, and handwriting variations. Secondly, we aligned original script fragments from different versions and tracked changes in dialogue, staging, and characterization. Finally, we compiled and creatively reconstructed the reliable pages of script we had, developing historically faithful scenes from the 1930s script to be read. Throughout the process, we differentiated that some pages were from the same version of the script, but just had different handwriting on them, whilst others were just completely different scripts with different characters, different conversations, or sometimes just the odd word which made them slightly different, therefore becoming another potential version to add to the collection. We would like to state that the page numbers of script throughout the reading differ between the 1930s version and the Tams Witmark version. We would also like to provide a disclaimer for some of the xenophobic or misogynistic language used in these readings. Again, we aim to educate about these cultural artifacts, and as such, we will ask audiences to contextualize this and reflect. We apologize in advance for any possible distress caused. We will be reading extracts from Act 1, Scene 1, and Act 1, Scene 2. Our story is set in Custerville, Arizona, a town consisting only of men. The last woman in this town was murdered over a lover's row. Up till our first extract, our male protagonist, Danny, has been sent there to supervise his father's ranch because his father has been very wary of his laissez-faire lifestyle in New York. Being wealthy, he takes an expensive taxi the whole way. Upon arrival, the rural locals become alert to his metropolitan personage. Danny realizes there are no women in this town, and after a dispute between Danny and his taxi driver and the locals, Danny and his taxi driver are invited by the townspeople for a drink. It is then that Danny meets Molly, the postwoman for the town, whose character in the 1930s script was named Ginger. Catherine here will read for the character Danny, whilst Donatella will read for Molly or Ginger for the 1930s version. Hold on. Ginger Gray, a girl of the West, about 20 years old, rides in a Bronco, pulls up.
Don't you know any better than to park in the middle of the road?
Yes, I do.
If you're stalled, you ought to push that ash can over to one side.
What, are you a traffic cop?
No.
Well, don't call that taxi cab an ash can then.
New York license plates then, ain't they?
That's right.
What's it doing in Arizona?
It brought me out here.
All the way from New York?
Yes.
You must have left in a stupor.
No, I left in that taxi.
Kinda expensive, isn't it?
I didn't know it was a jib cab till to Kansas City.
Oh, you came to there, hey?
What's the idea of the cross exam?
We get acquainted fast in the West.
What's the idea of that sign?
You mean no woman?
I don't mean that you're a woman.
Well, I am, but I don't live in Clusterville.
You're married?
Not yet.
You're engaged?
Say, what's the idea?
Didn't you say you get acquainted fast in the West?
Yes, but
Well, down east, we take longer because we want to know everything.
everybody I ever met from New York knew everything.
Come down off your high horse.
Where are you bound for? Clusterville?
Yeah, I got a ranch near there.
Where?
Buzzards.
That's the Churchill place.
That's right, I'm a Churchill by birth. Since then, Father and I have drifted apart gradually, until he thought it better I spend a year or so out here to recuperate.
Been a bad boy, haven't you?
Not exactly bad. Modern.
Buzzard's Ranch will cure you. For miles, there's nothing but nothing.
Can I see you once in a while?
No, I'm busy.
Busy?
Yes, I take care of the mail in the section.
My God, all of them?
I'm the post girl.
Oh,
Can I give you a lift to Clusterville?
no thanks. The fellow that drives a taxi has gone for enough gas to get us there.
Foot?
No, indeed, he's on a bicycle.
Where do you get a bicycle around here?
We brought one from New York for emergencies like that.
You New Yorkers think of everything, don't you?
It's very popular in the East among girls.
Really?
Yeah, ask a girl to take a motor ride and she brings her bicycle.
We bring horses out here.
Ever been East?
Never. It must be a wild place from all we hear about it.
New York is a marvelous place.
For you, perhaps.
You'd like it too. I'd see to that.
Oh, would you?
In New York, there's something to do every second.
That wouldn't appeal to me. And if that's your viewpoint, I don't think you would either.
Couldn't use me, hey?
I'm afraid not.
Maybe if you knew me better, you'd change your mind about that.
If you think you're going, all right, I'll be getting on.
I'll never be all right if I don't see you again.
I have my doubts then.
Give me the chance, will you?
If you get mail, I suppose I'll have to deliver it.
I'll have everybody in America write to me.
You're the least bit conceited, aren't you?
No, darling, just ambitious.
Well, I'll be seeing you. So long.
So long.
Ginger exits, Danny sings balance of refrain, and we fade out at finish. Now we'll be performing the same dialogue from the 1950s Thames Whitmark version and comparing the scenes.
Good evening, Mr. Churchill.
I beg your pardon?
They've had a good day for the haying out at Buzzards.
Yes, haven't they? Excuse me, how did you know my going to Buzzard's Ranch?
Your father sent you out here for 2 years because he says you're a girl crazy. You drove out here in a taxi. The fare was $742.30.
Are you the village fortune teller?
And news travels fast in Clusterville.
It certainly must. But say, if you're here, what's the idea of that sign?
Sign?
I don't live here. I work here.
Doing what?
I take care of all the mails in this section.
Good heavens, all of them?
I'm the post girl. But why all the questions?
I always heard you get acquainted fast out west.
We do, but
We always take a little longer in New York because we want to know everything.
everybody I ever met from New York knew everything.
If a letter comes to me, Do you have to deliver it?
Yes.
I'll have everybody in America write to me.
You're the least bit conceited, aren't you?
No, just ambitious.
Is New York as wild as the place as they say it is?
New York is the most marvelous place in the world.
For you, perhaps.
It would be for you too. I'd see to that.
Would you?
Yes, I'd enjoy showing you around.
Thanks.
What about out here?
I'm busy.
Too busy to go to a dance once in a while? Or play a game of tennis?
Say, you must think Buzzards is one of those dude ranches.
A what?
A dude ranch.
A dude ranch. You've given me a great idea. I never thought of that.
What do you mean?
A dude ranch. That's just what it's gonna be. Girls, cocktails, dancing, roughhouse. I'll show him something. All my name isn't Danny Churchill. My dad thought he was sending me away from the bright lights. Well, I'll just bring the bright lights out here and turn them all on. We'll have gambling, horse racing, everything. Keep away from Broadway for 2 years. I guess not.
Count me out. But when I'm not working, I am sleeping.
Don't you ever have a good time out here?
Sure we do. You ought to have been at my last candy pull.
Candy pull. Oh, lady, what I'm not gonna do for you.
Have some pity on an Easterner, show a little sympathy. No one possibly could be sterner than you have been with me. There's a job that I'm applying for, let me put it to you thus. It's a partnership I'm dying for, Mr. and Mrs.
Good night, Danny.
So soon? You just arrived. You can't go yet. I haven't had a chance to talk to you.
That's the reason I'm leaving.
Well, let's talk now.
You forget how early I have to be up in the mornings.
Can't you oversleep tomorrow and get up at 5?
That makes a day too short.
You're wonderful. You can't go yet. I've got a lot of things I want to say to you.
Won't they keep?
No.
Then they can't be worth hearing.
What? I got a lot of ideas about us.
For instance,
Our future?
our future?
Certainly. Back east. With you helping me, I expect to get time off for good behavior out here.
Seems to me you're starting to get the wrong direction you're in the wrong direction to get time off.
Meaning what?
This dude ranch and fast living.
Oh, that's only to pass the time along. I'll settle down once we get back east.
When we get back east,
Why? I'll have everything fixed perfect for you. Wait and see. A swell little house on Long Island, not far from the city, so I can commute. A garden where I can sit and watch the evening sun go down and the morning sun come up. Think of it, darling. 2 sons and 1 daughter. I can picture the whole thing, just as it'll be. Can you cook? It doesn't matter. Imagine, every day I'll take the 5:15. You'll be waiting for me as I arrive home, and you'll say, Danny, where you been all night?
I can imagine.
No, Ginger. We'll come home every morning in time to kiss the children before they're off to school. We'll have breakfast first at Reuben's.
Where is that?
There's 3 of them. 2 in New York, 1 in Philadelphia, if we ever happen to be in Philadelphia. But we'll never happen to be in Philadelphia.
I wonder what you would have done if you had lived when men earned their living by the sweat of their brows.
I'd have sold handkerchiefs.
Everything's a big joke to you, isn't it?
Everything but you.
I'd be too, if you had the chance.
Won't you give me the chance?
I will not.
How can you say that without thinking it over?
I have thought it over. I mean,
Oh, you have, hey?
I didn't have to exert myself.
I don't care. Just to know you've given me a thought is encouraging.
I bet you were caught in the stock market.
Marry me, and we'll reform together.
And live apart?
That isn't the way I feel about it.
After song, they dance and exit. Enter Patsy and Wilbur. Now we'll perform the same dialogue from the 1950s Thames Whitmore script and highlight interesting points across the versions.
Who are those funny-looking people I saw you talking to?
That was Slick Fothergill and his wife. They want a job in my new gambling room.
Poor, quiet little Clusterville. What aren't you doing to it?
Have you seen my old-time ballroom?
No, I haven't.
Come on, I'll show it to you.
Not now. I'm going home.
You can't go yet. I haven't had a chance to talk to you.
You forget how early I have to be up in the mornings.
Can't you oversleep tomorrow and get up at 5?
That makes a day too short.
If you get up at the time I go to bed, how are we going to see each other?
Must we?
You bet we must. I've got a lot of things I want to say to you about our future.
Our future?
Yes. Why, I'll have everything fixed perfect for you. Wait and see. A swell little house on Long Island, not far from the city so I can commute. A garden where we can sit and watch the evening sun go down and the morning sun come up. Think of it, darling. I can picture the whole thing, just as it'll be. Can you cook? It doesn't matter. Imagine, every day I'll take the 5:15. You'll be waiting for me as I arrive home, and you'll say, "Danny, where you been all night?"
I can imagine. I wonder what you would have done if you had lived when men earned their living by the sweat of their brows.
I'd have sold handkerchiefs.
Everything's a big joke to you, isn't it?
Everything in this world is a great big joke.
I would be
Everything but you.
I would be too if you'd give me the chance.
Come on, give me the chance, will you?
I will not.
Don't you like me, Molly?
Sure I do.
How much?
Enough to make me want to be careful.
Careful of me?
No, of me.
I'm crazy about you, Molly.
I wonder how many girls you've told that to.
Well, here's something I've never said before. Will you marry me?
Oh, don't be silly.
Oh, come on, just this once.
Embrace me, my sweet embrace of all you. Embrace me, you irreplaceable you. Just one look at you, my heart grew tipsy in me. You and you alone bring out the gypsy in me.
We have now come to the end of our reading. This performance has used our constructed version of a 1930s Girl Crazy script to highlight the portrayal of gender in 1930s musical theater, whilst the comparison to the more recent 1950s script has provided key insights into how this portrayal changed or was maintained over a 20-year period. All in all, we hope you have learned something new today about the little-known 1930s Gershwin musical Girl Crazy. Thank you for listening.
Good evening, everyone. I think we've already had the best introduction to a talk that we can have, so please let's thank our student performers once more for that fantastic introduction. Hello, I'm Barbara Kelly. I'm the head of School of Music, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our second ever public lecture. I know that we have people from all over. We've got some colleagues, we've got family, we've got honorary family members who've had a wild goose chase to get here but made it. And we've also got people online who, from the Library of Congress, from the Schubert Archive, from the Gershwin Archive. I'm sure Ian will keep me right if you know him well. He'll definitely make sure I'm not getting it wrong. But that's fantastic. So we've had people from so many different places, and a very warm welcome to all of you. It's a real pleasure to introduce my fabulous colleague, Dr. Ian Sapiro. Ian's association with the School of Music goes back a long way. He came here as a student in 1997. Okay. And then he was so good in various postdocs and various things, and he became a member of staff in 2003. And has taken on many roles in the School of Music, including the Director of Student Education, and particularly when I arrived, that was my induction, very helpful, along with other colleagues. And now he has a role in the faculty as well, Deputy Pro-Dean for Student Education. So, Dr. Sapiro, Ian is an Associate Professor of Music. His research is focused on music for screen and stage, and in particular, the processes that lead to and the people involved in the creation and production of the music. It's quite an original and distinctive angle on it. So the music that we ultimately hear when we go to the theatre. He was co-investigator on an AHRC-funded project, The Professional Career and Output of Trevor Jones, and that was in 2013 to 2016. And he received funding from the British Academy for a small project on musicals in 2018. Much more recently, in 2024, he became the first holder of the Annegret Fauser and Tim Carter Fellowship at the Library of Congress Music Division, through which he spent a week at the Library of Congress. And I remember the visa coming through literally seconds before you had to leave for the airport, but it came through. A week there where he spent exploring and gathering materials, and these materials have informed today's lecture. Outside of the university, he has another musical life. He's a professional musical director for amateur theatre, working with a range of societies and companies in West Yorkshire over the past 25 years, and twice winning awards for musical direction. He has conducted the Alhambra Theatre in Bradford, and in 2010 brought his amateur dramatics and the School of Music to work together in a collaborative production of West Side Story, with Halifax Light Opera Society at the Victoria Theatre in Halifax. He was very delighted to be presented with a rare NODA Commemoration Award for over a decade of devoted service to amateur theatre in a paid role. And he was nominated by Buttershaw St. Paul's Amateur Operatic and Dramatic Society for that in 2017. At the moment, and this is important because there might still be tickets left if we're lucky,
Yes,
he's working with Bingley Little Theatre, and they're doing Betty Blue Eyes in 3 weeks' time. And the Guiseley, excuse my pronunciation, I'm from further north, theatrical productions, for whom he is the MD, for 9 to 5 in October. So I imagine the tickets aren't yet.
No, they're available as
Are
well.
they? Okay. And then the first amateur production of Come From Away in West Yorkshire Theatre in 2026. So we can give you much more information on that. Now, one of the features of our public lecture series is that there are fantastic titles. The first one had an amazing title. It was about an animal, wasn't it? About being clarinet. And I think tonight's, this evening's title is equally enticing. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to our public speaker, Ian Sapiro. Thank you very much.
I've been trying to see how many riffs I can get on I Got Rhythm, I Got Music through various parts of this project. I'm still working on them. So good afternoon, good evening perhaps by now. Thank you for coming, whether you're here in the room in Leeds or whether you're joining us online. I'm going to talk to you today about the challenges of reconstructing musicals as critical editions, and I'm going to use my current work on the 1930 musical Girl Crazy as a case study. But before I get going properly, I need to acknowledge some people, organisations and institutions that have supported this project to date. So the University of Leeds School of Music and the Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Cultures both awarded me research leave in 2023-24 to work on this project. And during that year of leave, I applied for and was awarded the inaugural Annegret Fowler and Tim Carter Fellowship at the Library of Congress Music Division for a project exploring the challenges of creating critical editions of musicals. And this public lecture marks the end of my fellowship year, and I'm extremely grateful to Vin Navarra, Mark Eden Horowitz, Paul Sommerfeld and Miriam Grimberg at the Library of Congress for their support with my research, and of course to Annegret and Tim for establishing the fellowship in the first place. In addition to materials from several collections at the Library of Congress Music Division, this research also draws on items copied from several other locations in the US, including Cal State Long Beach University, the University of Madison, Wisconsin, and Arizona State University, whose librarians patiently look through their archival holdings to extract and copy relevant materials for me. Tams Whitmark in New York, now managed by Concord Theatricals, similarly granted me permission to photograph all the higher materials they hold for Girl Crazy. Sylvia Wang and Mark Schwartz at the Schubert Archive in New York gave generously of their time, patience and expertise and enabled me and my research assistant, Katya Richardson, who spent many, many hours in the archive on my behalf, to scan the hundreds of pages of script and other paperwork for the show held in their collections. And these documents form the basis for the research project carried out by Catherine, Edie, Donatella and Henry, on which they just presented. Last, but by no means least, I must thank Andy Kohler and Jacob Kersner at the Gershwin Critical Edition and the Gershwin Estate for their ongoing support and assistance. So what is a critical edition anyway? In simple terms, it's a publication of a work, in this case a piece of music, that's based on source materials and includes critical discussion of the processes by which decisions about any ambiguities have been reached. Or, as Mark Clegg puts it, editing music is a critical act of document examination, detailed research, musical analysis, and cultural criticism. In his seminal book, The Critical Editing of Music, James Greer suggests that editing consists of a series of educated, critically informed choices. In short, the act of interpretation. Greer continues, outlining the authority of the composer, at least over sources created by themselves or under their direct supervision, and of the editor in the course of evaluating and interpreting these sources, noting that editing therefore comprises a balance between these two authorities. Importantly, the editor of a critical edition must explain the rationale behind and the outcomes of their editorial decisions through detailed critical notes included with the musical score. So, I'm going to stop for a second because I failed to say something I should have said first up. There's a QR code on each slide, and I've remembered because I'm about to cover this one up. There's a QR code on each slide if you're watching online or in the room, and you have a question you might want to ask at the end of this talk. You can scan the QR code, it will take you to a Padlet, you can type your question in on there, particularly if you're online, someone in the room will kindly read that out for you later. Okay. As I say, it's on every slide, so if a question occurs at any point, feel free to dive onto the Padlet. But back to what I was saying. So in this way, because of all this sort of critical apparatus in this way, a critical edition differs from a more practical reconstruction of a piece, such as that undertaken by Roxbury Records, who released the soundtrack to Girl Crazy in 1990. While the team who worked on that reconstruction used archival materials to address errors and inconsistencies in the existing Tams Whitmark band parts, they also introduced elements into the music that have no foundation in the show's sources. They transposed songs to suit the singers recruited for the project, and they did not provide a comprehensive account of how or why decisions were taken in the project. Therefore, although their recording is helpful for me as I undertake my research, and I'm going to play some extracts from it, and in fact, you already heard some extracts from it in the student presentation, it represents at best an ideal version, and at worst an invented version of Girl Crazy, rather than being a critical reconstruction of the musical. So throughout his book, James Greer comments frequently on the role of the composer as the author of the musical work and their connection to the source materials from which an edition might be constructed. The composer's name has almost become part of the work's title for many pieces of classical music. So think of Beethoven's Fifth. Actually, Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Or Widor's Toccata. The fifth movement of Symphony for Organ No. 5. Musicals and their forebears are often also indelibly associated with their composer or a composer-lyricist. From Gilbert and Sullivan's The Pirates of Penzance.
I am the very model of a model major general. I've information, vegetable, animal, mineral. I know the kings of England and I quote the facts historical from Marathon to Waterloo in order categorical.
And if you know The Pirates of Penzance, my orphan slip will make much more sense to you. There we go, some people do. All the way through to Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton. And I do now wonder if that motif is as, or perhaps even more recognisable than the opening of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. But attribution of authorship in this way oversimplifies the relationship between a musical theatre work and those responsible for its creation. Dominic Broomfield McHugh observes that musicals are normally created by multiple authors in collaboration, and Mark Eden Horowitz has noted the impact of assistants and creative collaborators on the work of some leading Broadway Golden Age composers. Indeed, while it may be surprising to find blank bars within the sources for a piece of classical music, this is relatively common in musical theatre manuscripts, since, as Amy Parent states, an orchestrator will often compose song introductions and ride-outs at the end of a song, shares responsibility for dance sequences with a dance music arranger, almost always writes the overture, entr'acte, curtain call, and exit music, and may have to compose scene change music. Now, although all of these pieces of incidental music and chorus arrangements will be based on the composer's material, they would never have existed in the composer's handwriting, nor necessarily have been prepared under the composer's direct guidance. Accordingly, although it might normally be the case in classical music, in musical theatre, the notion that the composer or a composer-lyricist partnership might be the sole authority, let alone the sole author, is extremely misleading. Broomfield McHugh also observes another key difference between classical and musical theatre works, noting that with the latter, their texts evolve through creative processes leading to performance events, rather than being conceived as fixed works emanating from a single authority. Now, although Broomfield McHugh's focus is on Golden Age musicals, the process of continuous development and change has always been part of the creation of musical theatre works, and remains so even for contemporary musicals. Indeed, some more recent musicals have official companion books that chart the development of the show from conception to production. So, Irene Sankoff, David Hayne and Lawrence Maslin's 2019 book, Come From Away, Welcome to the Rock, and Michael Clastening's 2023 publication, Creating Back to the Future, and there are more, are, to me, both fascinating accounts of how the structures, characters, scripts and songs evolved in these respective musicals. I have at home one for In the Heights and one for Dear Evan Hansen that I still haven't started reading yet. Changes to these works are an expected outcome of workshops, of rehearsals, tryouts, and may even occur during previews. And, as these contemporary companion books show, they result from the views of a range of stakeholders, including audience responses and reactions, rather than being limited to decisions taken by composers. Mark Clegg's views on collaborative practice in theatre reflect the multiplicity of voices that contribute to the development of musicals. And he says, each theatrical production was and is unique, the creation not of a composer, but of composers, performers, designers, scenery painters, dancers, conductors, and audiences, and we might add choreographers and various other people too. Here, the confrontation of a work of collaborative theatre with the tradition of critical editing results in the depiction of an artistic process rather than a final product. So pertinently, both Broomfield McHugh and Clegg allude to the fact that a performance of a musical theatre work is just that. It's a performance, and that this does not necessarily define the work as fixed or finished. I'll return to this idea a little bit later, but for now it's sufficient to say that a critical editor of a musical doesn't just have to identify the show that they're editing, but also when in its ongoing existence the edition will represent. Now, these distinctions that I've outlined between creative and developmental processes for classical and musical theatre works have significant implications for the critical editing of musicals. Since these works lack the single point of origin or authorship, the effectively linear writing process, and the identifiable point of completion that exist, generally speaking, for most historical concert pieces. Accordingly, editors of critical editions of musicals can't necessarily rely on approaches common to the creation of critical editions of other music of other genres, and they face some challenges that editors of these other works may not. In an ideal world, the editor of a musical would have access to a surviving full score that includes all the musical numbers with lyrics, and a surviving complete script containing the entire libretto and the stage directions. And these two archival sources would be dated, so the editor could be sure they related to the same performance, and there would also be some sort of assurance that these were official materials, thereby enabling the editor to bring the authority of the show's various creative authors into dialogue with their own when making the edition, and that would be wonderful. Anyone that's done any editing of anything at all will know this probably never happens. The reality as I work on my critical edition is, unsurprisingly then, rather more complicated. So many original sources just don't survive. Even though the production I'm looking at is from under 100 years ago, there are no original full scores or band parts. So I'm working from a combination of original piano materials and the orchestra parts held by Tams Whitmark that are derived from, but are not, the original band parts for the show. By contrast, I have 7 complete scripts for the show. It's really helpful. Drawn from a range of collections with some subtle and some much clearer distinctions between them. And this, of course, calls the authority of each of those resources into question. What is the script if I have 7 published scripts? Surviving archival materials contain ambiguities, both in terms of what they say, so messy and florid handwriting are quite common on them, and when they're from, with very few items dated, and many containing handwritten annotations that in themselves can't be accurately dated even when the underlying resources can be. The identities of the copyists who actually wrote the music on the page, and of those who amended the script during rehearsals, as you saw during the student presentation, lots of pencil markings. And these were presumably, but not certainly, the actors themselves. But these identities are frequently unclear, and items can lack direction, focus, and connection, as is the case for most of the 1,100 separate uncatalogued pages of script for Girl Crazy that the liberal arts students have kindly been wading through this year. Published sources usually do contain dates, though these may relate to copyright renewals and later developments rather than identifying years of composition or creation. And even when the year of composition is included, any connection between a published piano vocal book, for instance, and a specific performance of the show remains unclear, not least because you usually only get a year. If you get a month, that might be nice, but a specific date, I would think never. So in the rest of this lecture, I'm going to focus specifically on Girl Crazy, a musical from 1930 with music by George Gershwin, lyrics by Ira Gershwin, and a book, the script, by Guy Bolton and Jack McGowan, and of which I'm currently creating a critical edition. I'll explain briefly why and how I've ended up working on this show, tell you a bit about the musical itself, and then use it as a case study to explore some of these challenges of creating a critical edition of a musical. So, apart from hearing about it from me or reading about it on a poster or a website or wherever it is you found out about this lecture, if you'd heard of Girl Crazy already, please put your hand up and you can play along online if you like, but bear in mind I can't see you. Okay. Wow, a surprising number. This pulls the rest of my talk into disarray, but don't worry about that. Okay, this time put your hand up if you've ever heard any version of this song.
I got rhythm, I got music, I got my man who can ask for anything more. I got daisies in green pastures, I got my man who can ask for anything more. An old man's trouble, say I don't mind him, but you won't find him round my door. I got starlight, and I got sweet dreams, I got my man who can ask for anything more, who can ask for anything more.
Going to come back to that show of hands later. You haven't completely ruined the rest of my talk, don't worry. Okay, for the benefit of those watching online, more people than I had anticipated had already heard of Girl Crazy. And that's okay. That's probably a good thing. So I ended up working on this musical almost by accident. So back in 2017, when preparing for a semester of research leave, Mark Eden Horowitz, the CD and music specialist at the Library of Congress, kindly sent me some information on the library's musical theatre collections to see if anything sparked my interest. Girl Crazy caught my attention for a few reasons, primarily that the library had quite a lot of archival material for the show, which I figured would be helpful for doing a research project. I guess if I'd realised then that they didn't have any full scores, any band parts, or an original script, I might have thought twice before deciding to go for it. But you know, you live and learn. I did, however, also have a personal reason for wanting to work on Girl Crazy. As Barbara mentioned in her introduction, I've been what I call a professional musical director for amateur theatre for nearly 30 years. And back in 2005, while working with Buttershaw St Paul's Amateur Operatic and Dramatic Society in Bradford, I was fortunate to conduct Crazy for You, which is the 1992 musical based on Girl Crazy, which features several of its leading songs. Having rehearsed those songs for several months while preparing to present Crazy for You, the chance to work on the original show that gave us I Got Rhythm, Embraceable You, But Not For Me, and so many other songs was too good to pass up. John Graziano at City University of New York brought the Gershwin edition to my attention, and the editorial board there gave me permission to start gathering materials relating to Girl Crazy with a view to preparing a critical edition of the show. After a productive semester of research leave in the latter part of 2017, during which I photographed and scanned materials at the Library of Congress, I continued gathering copies of materials through the rest of the academic year, including going to Tams Whitmark in New York and visiting the library at Cal State Long Beach and the RKO archive in Los Angeles. But a combination of leadership roles that I had at Leeds and then the disruption caused by COVID meant the project then lay dormant for several years. At least that's what I'm blaming for the project lying dormant for several years. My research leave last year provided me the time I needed to kickstart the edition, and more broadly this research into the creation of critical editions of musicals, and the Annegret Fauser and Tim Carter Fellowship has provided the opportunity to engage with the archival resources needed to pursue this musicological investigation of the challenges of creating a critical edition of a musical alongside the editing work itself. Girl Crazy was produced in 1930, when the Gershwins and the musical comedy genre were at their peak, and it was popular with audiences. It played for highly respectable 272 performances in New York, and that was the Gershwins' second longest run of the 1930s. It was the first new Gershwin musical conducted on Broadway by the composer. He did the first night. And it launched the careers of Ginger Rogers, who met and first danced with Fred Astaire while doing rehearsals for the show, though he wasn't in it, and of Ethel Merman in her Broadway debut. The pit orchestra for the show featured future prominent band leaders Red Nichols, Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, Jimmy Dorsey, and Gene Krupa, so it was quite good. And it was the production on which leading orchestrator Robert Russell Bennett mastered the jazz style of scoring that defined much of the Broadway sound across the following decade. The musical was acclaimed by critics following the opening night performance on Broadway. Bide Dudley's The Evening World Review called the score extremely original, and Stephen Rathbun in the New York Sun proclaimed that before the first act was half over, this musical comedy was established as a hit. Willella Waldorf, writing in the New York Evening Post, called it one of the best musical scores George Gershwin has ever turned out, going on to claim that the Gershwin score is so uniformly tuneful that it's hard to select outstanding numbers without reeling off the entire song list in the back of the programme. Indeed, Red Nichols and his Five Pennies charted at number 2 in late 1930 with Embraceable You, and at number 5 with I Got Rhythm. And along with But Not For Me, these hit songs quickly became established as standards. The show's plot, about a young man sent by his father from New York City to the fictional Custerville, Arizona, to escape the wiles of women, only to fall in love with the only woman out there, was quickly picked up by film studios. RKO's 1932 adaptation was followed by MGM releases in 1943 and 1965, the latter titled When the Boys Meet the Girls. And, as already noted, a skeleton of the plot survives in the 1992 stage musical Crazy for You. And each of these adaptations includes a handful of the show's best-known songs. However, despite its popular and critical acclaim and the number of people in this room who have already heard of it, the significant individuals connected with it, and the longevity of some of the songs, Girl Crazy has effectively been lost. It's failed to sustain a place in the performing repertoire, and what little scholarly attention it has generally focuses on discussion of its most famous songs rather than the show itself. The musical is also generally overshadowed in the public consciousness by the Gershwin hits that sandwich it, the revised Strike Up the Band from early 1930 and Of Thee I Sing from 1931. And this results in the show largely disappearing from view, despite its most famous song, I Got Rhythm, being covered hundreds of times in vocal and instrumental versions since Ethel Merman first belted it out on Broadway nearly a century ago. And it's fitting that I invoke Merman here because I'm going to play a slightly longer excerpt from I Got Rhythm that we just heard a few moments ago. This recording is from a memorial concert given in 1937 following George Gershwin's death, at which Merman sang this number from Girl Crazy, with the orchestra players apparently performing from the original charts, although where they found them, I have no idea. Now, I'd like you to listen in particular to what Merman does towards the latter part of this extract, so the bit you didn't hear just a moment ago. Here we go.
I got rhythm, I got music, I got my man who could ask for anything more. I got daisies in green pastures, I got my man who could ask for anything more. An old man trouble, say I don't mind him, but you won't find him round my door. I got starlight, I got sweet dreams, I got my man who could ask for anything more, who could ask for anything more. Who could ask for anything more. Who could ask for anything more.
So as an MD, I can't help cueing singers. It's DNA. So hopefully you heard and saw me gesticulate towards Merman's Held High Seas as the band played the melody of the second chorus. And this version of I Got Rhythm is probably the best known interpretation of the song as it appears in the show. But what does the show really mean anyway? So on the screen, you can see the music for the song's chorus in George Gershwin's own handwriting in the blue ink. The vocal line and the piano accompaniment are clear, notwithstanding some corrections made in pencil by Gershwin's music editor, Albert Sermay. And they show the chorus with a repeat mark at the end of the second page, very bottom at the end. And this is the final page of this archival source, so it just indicates the chorus goes through twice. There's no indication that the singer should do anything different on the repeat of the chorus. There's no held C anywhere. And the that's the musical source in Gershwin's hand. Ira Gershwin produced a single lyric sheet for this song that's in the Library of Congress archives. And again, there are no different lyrics for a second chorus, nothing saying, who could ask for anything more, or anything like that. So it's unclear why the singer should do something different on the second version of the chorus, and neither of these archival resources maps onto what Merman so famously does. Now, excuse us what appears to be a slight diversion, because the playbill, the programme booklet, for the opening night of the show on Broadway identifies the principal cast, and at the bottom it shows the musicians, Red Nichols and his orchestra, Al Siegel at the piano. Siegel was already Merman's pianist, accompanying her as she sang in clubs and bars, and he joined Girl Crazy with her to play the piano on stage in her musical numbers. However, just one day after the show opened, Variety reported that Siegel had been taken ill, noting that Miss Merman remains in Girl Crazy without her partner. And indeed, the playbill for the following week's performances does not identify a pianist at all, presumably because the length of Siegel's absence was as yet undetermined. By the 15th of December 1930, which is the next playbill for the show I've been able to locate, we can see that Siegel had been replaced by a new pianist called Roger Edens. There are a couple of sources I've found that suggest Edens was the pianist in the Red Nichols Orchestra that played for Girl Crazy. And although some of the other information in these sources is quite dubious, and in fact occasionally clearly incorrect, if this was the case, then he would have been the obvious person to take over as the onstage pianist for Merman's songs. Now, this apparent digression into who the players for the show were is important, because Michael Feinstein, who was for many years Ira Gershwin's assistant, notes that it was Edens who suggested that Merman hold the high C during the second chorus, despite it not being what was written in the music at that point. Now, although it seems likely that Edens played in the pit when Girl Crazy opened on the 14th of October 1930, he would not have been in any sort of position to suggest this interpretation of the song until he took over as the onstage pianist, which was clearly no earlier than the 15th of October 1930. My view, therefore, is that the held Cs in the second chorus were added to the song after the show opened on Broadway, a view reinforced by Feinstein's comment that it's not in the original score. And I think also supported by the fact that most of the opening night reviews focus more on Merman's performance of the bluesy Sam and Delilah than I Got Rhythm, though she did stop the show on multiple occasions. Now, this interpretation is important for my work on the critical edition because, as I've already said, although we wouldn't normally expect a piece of music to change after its premiere, this happens in musicals at times, and performers can be responsible for it. And because they're more malleable and continue to evolve across their lives. I've had to select a fixed point in time for my edition, and I've opted for the opening night on Broadway, and I've picked that because it's the one performance that George Gershwin conducted. This means that despite the held Cs being widely recognised as part of I Got Rhythm, they won't appear in the vocal part for my edition of the musical, and I can provide justification within my critical notes for why I've taken this decision. I feel sure that there will be some people who object to the decision, but I will at least be able to justify why I've taken it. Of course, legitimate claims could be made for selecting a different date as the basis for the edition, maybe the closing night. And each would bring its own unique challenges and result potentially in a different version of Girl Crazy. Now, indeed, the Library of Congress holdings support additional tracing of the show's development even after it closed on Broadway, through a series of letters exchanged between one of the book writers, Guy Bolton, and the lyricist, Ira Gershwin, dated between 1953 and 1960. I'm just going to use some extracts from these letters. And the first three show the pair discussing potential London productions of the show, something that never ultimately materialised, and indeed Girl Crazy has still never been produced professionally in the UK. Of particular interest, to me anyway, is the idea that each of these creative contributors was not only willing, but in some respects keen, to continue to make changes to the show. And this is over 20 years after it played Broadway and then closed. Ira observes that he rewrote some of the song lyrics for the production in 1951, and Bolton talks about modernising the book once a contract to produce the show has been signed. The last of these three extracts discusses another potential London production, and it's notable because Ira identifies that he didn't have an accurate script to send to James Hammerstein. Indeed, given that Variety reported that Bert Lahr, who gets mentioned here, had been replaced by Willie Howard on the 6th of August 1930, more than a month before rehearsal started, the version that he sent Hammerstein must have been a very old version indeed. Towards the end of the 50s, Bolton returns to the idea of a London production as well as a new US tour, and comments about a revised book that will be much tighter and more of a play than was the original. And in his letter to Ira of the 11th of December 1959, he discusses potential substitutions of and additional musical numbers for this revised version of the show. Bolton's persistence is evident in his letters of January 1960, where he repeats the idea that a couple of extra songs are needed. In his letter of the 12th of January, he suggests including By Strauss and either Strike Up the Band or On and On and On, and replacing Treat Me Rough with a dance number, such as Shall We Dance or I Can't Be Bothered Now. And within a week, he was pushing Ira to approve Strike Up the Band, but with changes to the lyrics. Bolton's work continued apace, and he appears to have completed a revised book for the show only a month later, noting in his letter to Ira that the old book will be available for any who prefer to use it, and that Tams Witmark would pay for the new orchestrations for the revised show at a cost of more than $5,000. This is 1960. Perhaps ironically, and certainly for me frustratingly, although the original 1930 full scores don't survive, the handwritten full scores for the 1960 revised version of Girl Crazy are held at the Library of Congress. Although when I first went, I didn't know what they were. Bolton identifies the musical numbers in his revised version of Girl Crazy in a letter to Ira dated 12th of May 1960, in which he says that they are 1 week away from starting rehearsals. Comparing the song list to that from the Broadway opening playbill, we can see there are 4 new songs: By Strauss, March, which is Strike Up the Band, That Lost Barbershop Chord, and I Can't Be Bothered Now. Additionally, he has Act 1 below Act 2 because he's been talking about Act 2 in the letter, then it occurs to him he needs to tell Ira about Act 1 as well, so forgive them being upside down. But we can see also that most of the other songs have been shuffled around in the show. And 3 of them, Barbary Coast, the Act 1 Finaletto, and the Act 1 Finale, appear to have been removed. Treat Me Rough, however, has survived Bolton's cutting. It's up in Act 2 up there, but it gets moved down into Act 1 in his revised version of the show. And yet, just 2 years later, correspondence about a production in Dusseldorf in Germany indicates that the original version of the show would be used, but that the producers would like to interpolate by Strauss, which they felt would play well with a German audience. A decade after that, Ira appears to have had a complete change of heart regarding the rewrite of Girl Crazy, noting that he wants to get back to the original score, eliminating the interpolated by Strauss Strike Up the Band and Shall We Dance, the last of which didn't appear in Bolton's list of songs at all for 1960. And Ira also expresses a desire to reinstate Treat Me Rough, indicating that it was indeed ultimately removed in 1960, despite its presence in the song list in Bolton's letter. Would-be producer Michael Hoover tried to persuade Ira to allow him to keep Strike Up the Band in the show, but Ira refused. Interestingly, he appeared to take issue with the song's inclusion because the proposed production was a professional one. And while it might seem tempting to start considering the differences between professional and licensed amateur versions of musicals, and I have thought about it, but the implications of these differences for understanding what constitutes the musical, I think, are a slight step too far for this project. And Barbara mentioned that I'm doing the musical Betty Blue Eyes in 3 weeks' time. The materials for that you're actually supplied with to do the show represent at least 2 different versions of the show. I've got vocal parts in the piano vocal book that don't match the score, that don't match the piano vocal score or the script. So it's not just critical editions that have to grapple with this. But back to Girl Crazy, because for the final part of this lecture, I'm going to focus on Ethel Merman's other big production number from Act 1, Scene 5, which is Sam and Delilah. And I'm going to use that to take you through just some of the processes and decisions that I've had to make in the course of editing the work for this critical edition. I'm going to play you the opening of the song, and this is taken from the Roxbury recording of the show, made in 1990. So the style and the feel of the song are captured immediately by the opening bars of the music. But even before we hear a note, I had to take an editorial decision. And this regards the tempo of the song, for which there's no indication at all in any of the published vocal scores or the band parts. Not all that useful if you're trying to perform it. There's also no indication in any version of the script of what sort of speed this number should be taken at. So to resolve this, I went back to Gershwin's holograph piano score, on which he very kindly wrote tempo di blues, a blues tempo, at the start of the vocal line. Now, I'm not sure why this hasn't transferred into any of the published materials, but I didn't produce any of those. This isn't particularly specific, a blues tempo, But it does provide a model for the style of the number, and an indicative tempo can be determined by considering other songs in a similar style by Gershwin and others that date from around this time. Identifying errors is something of a full-time occupation when creating a critical edition, and Girl Crazy is a particularly rich example, I would say, in this respect. Indeed, if I didn't have to enumerate them in the edition, I would suggest to you that there are innumerable errors and inconsistencies in the Tams Whitmark band parts that are serving as the basis for the orchestral parts for my edition. Within Sam and Delilah, there are what appear to be incorrect notes, accidentals, and rhythms in several parts. But it is important to keep in mind something that Mark Plagg says, which is, how do you know it's an error? In some cases, the error is obvious, because retaining the music as shown in the band parts would lead to clashes in the harmony that are not only out of keeping with the rest of the song and the show, but with Gershwin's style in general. For example, here are the violin 2, violas 1 and 2, and cello parts for bars 42 to 44 of the song. And I've processed these in Sibelius directly from the Tams Whitmark band parts. Now, if you can read music, you can see that the second violin and the viola are in minor sevenths throughout this passage, and that in bar 44, the second violin and the first viola are likewise in minor sevenths. Now, this could, I'll admit it could, be some sort of jazzy harmony, except that it would be very much out of keeping with the preceding and following bars. Bar 44, in particular, would have the second violin and the cello outlining the home chord of B flat, while the violas superimposed a chord of A flat, and the whole passage would have the second violas rather uncharacteristically playing higher than the first violas. And this harmonic profile doesn't fit the rest of the song or places where this passage recurs. All of this points to some sort of error in the parts, and in this case I believe it's a simple copying mistake. When the copyists wrote the parts out from the full score, they've misread the stave they've been copying from, and they've accidentally mistranscribed the cello part into the viola part. And you'll see there's one note that's different, but it is otherwise identical. And likewise, they've written the notes from the second violin into the first viola in bar 44. It's quite easy to do when you've got a sort of 25 stave score and you're copying an individual part out. To correct these errors, I've drawn on the harmony I can see in the rest of the orchestra, supported by that shown in the piano vocal score, and I've examined the relationship between the different string parts in similar passages in the song to construct, actually I hope to reconstruct, the viola parts in the affected bars. Other similar sections, though, are not necessarily always so clearly errors. So in bars 49 to 52, clarinets 1 and 2 play in unison, but the surrounding phrase has them playing in harmony. Now, I've had to weigh up the likelihood of this being a deliberate effect or an accidental copying error similar to that encountered with the strings, where one line from the score has been copied into two parts in the individual parts. Based on the context of the passage, I've interpreted this as an error and changed the notes in clarinet 2 to continue the same approach as in the surrounding bars, but an argument could equally be made for considering this section differently. The Library of Congress holds 4 sheets of typed lyrics for this song, one of which is a copy of one of the others, presumably made using a mimeograph or carbon paper or a similar copying system available in 1930. 3 of the 4 pages are headed Sam and Delilah, and each of these includes handwritten amendments to typed lyrics. For the main song, I've selected this sheet as the definitive version of the lyrics for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it shows in type some of the handwritten amendments found on some of the other sheets. And secondly, it's the only page that identifies the correct scene in the show in which this number is found, Act 1, Scene 5, indicating that it was created closer to the point at which the show was staged than any of the other pages of lyrics for the song. Now, there's an encore for the song as well, but there are no lyrics provided for this in any of the piano vocal scores, nor in the chorus vocal book that's part of the Tams Whitmark materials. There are, however, handwritten lyrics for the encore on some of the archival lyric sheets for the song. But a bit more detective work is then needed to ascertain which are most likely to be the right lyrics to include in my edition. The encore lyrics written on this page, from which I've taken the main song, are in blue ink, and this matches that on an earlier of the lyric sheets. this one, implying that these lyrics in blue ink date from later than those which have been typed or written in black ink on this sheet, because the black ink corrections appear in type on the other page. Indeed, the fourth page within this set of papers is headed Encore and shows in type this bottom corner set of lyrics in blue ink from this page, rather than those on any of the other sheets of paper. Accordingly, in my edition, far from just repeating the words to the main song, which the published sources indicate is the case, the Encore has a distinct set of lyrics that includes the lines, "Delilah, full of guile, points a lesson that's distressing," which apparently rhymes when you say it in an American accent. And hopefully my American colleagues somewhere can tell me this. But that's as written here on this sheet. So you can see from the typed lyric sheets that there was often little or no indication of who's singing, and in particular where a chorus or an ensemble might join a principal during a song. George Gershwin's piano vocal holographs even, sometimes, but occasionally there are holographs as well, but mainly holographs, sometimes, but only sometimes, provide that information. Sam and Delilah, fortunately for me and for this talk, happens to be one of those times. Piano vocal manuscripts copied from George's holograph, such as this one, show harmonies for girls, the sopranos and altos in 3 parts, and for tenors and basses, the latter in 2 parts, and this creates a 6-part chorus texture for the final part of the song. Perplexingly, these chorus harmonies are missing from most of the published piano vocal, in fact from all of the published piano vocal scores from the show. While there is chorus music at this point in the Tams Whitmark piano vocal score, it bears no relation to anything in these sources. It just doubles the main melody in octaves, which is not particularly inventive nor particularly nice to listen to. The liner notes for the Roxbury recording that I've been playing you excerpts from claim that they've reinstated George Gershwin's additional chorus harmonies for the first time since the Broadway run and US tour, but their approach is inconsistent. The holograph indicates that the chorus should match the rhythm of the principal line through to the end of the song, and this is heard in the Roxbury recording of the main song. However, both of the copyists' manuscripts made from George Gershwin's holograph show that the vocal parts were later developed to include chorus echoes at the end of each line of the lyric, and this version is used in the Roxbury recording for the encore. And hopefully you can see, you get the Delilah at the top of the page, and then the first bar on the bottom line, we have "Oh, Delilah" as an echo in the chorus. So yes, this is what's used in the Roxbury encore, but there appears to be no compelling justification for changing the approach between the song and the encore. And the Roxbury recording also ignores an instruction on this, the latter of the copyist scores, that the chorus should not sing at the very end of the song, leaving the very final phrase just for the soloist alone. In the case of the original production, leaving Merman to finish the song on her own. As a critical editor, I don't have the luxury of adopting a free approach to what I present. I can't decide to do the song in one way and the encore in another unless the sources support that interpretation. Having assessed the various sources and their likely relationships, I've opted to use these vocal harmonies as found in this copyist score, but then to leave the final lines as solo, because that's also indicated in this source. So I've brought back up the opening page of George Gershwin's holograph piano vocal score for the song, which he wrote starting in the key of C major, no sharps, no flats. By the time the show opened, though, the song had been transposed down into B flat major, 2 flats, as shown here in a piano vocal score. And that's because it was a better key for Ethel Merman, who was singing the song. Now, this in itself is nothing unusual, but it highlights that the source materials, even those written directly by the composer, can't always be assumed to accurately represent the work as performed in the theatre. And it also, therefore, emphasises a difference perhaps between musical theatre works and other types of music. So it seems unlikely, for instance, that a classical composer would compose a work in one key only to then publish it for performance in another because of a particular performer. The holograph, Gershwin's holograph, modulates from C up to E flat major and back to C in the course of the song. And although these published materials mimic the first of these modulations, they go from B flat up to D flat, they then resolve into C, not back down to B flat, for the closing section where the chorus join in. The Roxbury recording does return to B flat in the main song, mimicking the full key relationship from Gershwin's holograph, and then goes to C in the encore, matching the published materials, again producing a distinction between the song and the encore for which there's no evidence within the sources themselves. And if you have perfect pitch and you can recall what I played you at the beginning, you'll probably be sitting there thinking, but it's not in B flat, because the Roxbury recording is in A. They transposed it again because Lena Luft, their singer, sang it better in that key, further distancing that recording from what was heard when Merman premiered it on Broadway. The last aspect of this number that I'll raise concerns the start of the encore, marked in the band parts as being played at cue, presumably during the applause for the main song. Now, these bars repeat the musical gesture found in bars 11 to 13 of the main song that precedes the start of the vocals that we heard earlier. And as you can see, the players are then instructed to jump to rehearsal mark C on their completion, from where they play through to the end of the song as the encore. Now, this all seems quite innocuous, and indeed, these bars are identical to bars 11 to 13 in all the band parts, all the piano vocal scores, all the sources I've got, but that doesn't make them accurate. The issue here lies in the lower three lines of the music in this extract, for which reed players 3, 4, and 5, so focusing on reed players 3, 4, and 5. When they encounter this music in bars 11 to 13, they're playing saxophones. But when they reach them at the end of the piece and need to prepare for the encore, they're all playing clarinets. Now, saxophones, alto saxophones and clarinets are transposing instruments in different keys. If you read the same note, you get a different note coming out of them. Now, there is a change of key signature at the start of bar 86. It reads 3 and 4, we gain a sharp, indicating that these are parts for instruments in E flat for alto saxophones, rather than B flat for clarinets, and therefore that all three players need to switch from clarinet back to alto sax during the applause, and then in bar 88, rapidly switch back to clarinet to play at letter C. Now, I'm a sax and clarinet player myself. I've had to do this in musicals. Also, as a musical director, I've had frequent moments of anxiety watching woodwind players almost throw their instruments around, trying to make changes of instruments in almost no time at all. So it's not an outlandish suggestion to suggest that these changes of instruments were needed. But there is no instruction in any of the parts to change to saxes, nor to change back to clarinets. So an alternative explanation is that rather than the full score having this fully notated, it just indicated that bars 86 to 88 were a copy of bars 11 to 13, and that wouldn't be unusual. And therefore the copyist, when writing out the parts, has just looked back at bars 11 to 13 and written them out again. And of course, this is perfect in all of the band parts, apart from reeds 3, 4, and 5, who have changed transposing instruments in the meantime. And as a result, we end up with what I think of wrong notes here. This latter interpretation means the reeds couldn't contribute quite so strongly to this fanfare at the start of the encore, but it still feels more plausible to me than all of the instrument change indications, all 6 of them, missing from all 3 parts. But I am still pondering this one. I think this is what I'm going to go with, though. I've talked for slightly too long, but I've got to the end now, so that's good. But I hope this snapshot of working on Go Crazy has shown that creating a critical edition of a musical poses a number of challenges, and while some of them are similar to those encountered with when editing other types of music, some of them are more specific to musicals, or at least are not particularly common across most forms of music. The conceptual challenge, I think that was up there already, wasn't it? The conceptual challenge involves defining what the musical is, considering that a show can continue to change beyond the initial performance, or even the end of a Broadway run, and that there's a need to identify a specific performance iteration of the show to serve as the basis for the critical edition. Contextually, there's the challenge of understanding the relative authority of the multiple creatives involved in the development of a stage musical, which can include performers, directors, orchestrators, choreographers, and even audiences, as well as composers and lyricists. Musicals are commercial properties, and just as the letters I drew on earlier offer insight into how some of the creators tried to develop the show's commercial appeal over 20 years after it closed on Broadway, business papers such as contracts and legal documents can provide clues as to why decisions were taken regarding cuts, additions, and other changes to the show's creation and development. Gaps in the musical sources are an expected occurrence for musical theatre works and can make the identification of errors more difficult. Some material will never have existed in the composer's hand, and some material may simply have never existed in written form at all. For instance, in Girl Crazy, the 4-part barbershop quartet harmonies for the song Bide in My Time seem to have been invented by the original quartet, the foursome, and never existed in any of the written materials at all for the show. The continuous development of musicals through rehearsals, including matters such as the transposition of songs as cast members change, calls into question the reliability of normally authoritative composer-created sources. And similarly, annotations on handwritten, typed and published musical and textual materials can obscure the underlying source and its place in the relationship of materials. I'm looking forward to continuing my work on Girl Crazy, despite what I may have said this evening. But I'll admit I'm not sure if this is despite or because these challenges make creating a critical edition such an engaging project. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian. So I'd like to open up to the floor for any questions on Ian's talk, and anybody who's online. If you'd like to stick any questions that you have in the Padlet, I've got that here, so I can convey those to you. Okay, did you have a question?
Ian, thank you very much. It's really fascinating, and having known about your trip to the Library of Congress, I'm really delighted to hear some of the issues. I'm wondering whether there are more parallels with opera editions than perhaps other musical genre. I'm thinking actually of Bizet's Carmen, just to choose one example. I know that Richard Langham-Smith has worked on it for decades, trying to get a critical edition, and the difficulty of which one. Where is the work? You know, where do you, because of the changes over time, and obviously attitudes towards opera, particularly in the 19th century, well, 18th and 19th century, perhaps very different to how now we regard the work.
The work, yeah. I'll admit to a little bit of a gap there in terms of opera, but it doesn't surprise me, and it is what I was expecting someone to ask me about. My feeling is that there is probably a little bit of a difference commercially between what happens certainly now in opera. I appreciate they are also commercial ventures, and musicals, but also just the range of people that have some input into these productions. Notwithstanding that some classical composers do use orchestrators, it's a far greater practice in musical theatre, and I suspect that far more of a musical is actually written by orchestrators and assistants than would be the case in an opera, even an opera that goes through multiple developments and iterations. Likewise, there's a lot that I've found through the Library of Congress and Schubert Archive papers around the development of the cast for this show, and I think that had a significant implication for what key a lot of the musical numbers were in. So I think there's perhaps something there around those sorts of changes that might perhaps be less common in operas. A little bit of ignorance on my part, I'll admit to there. But the idea that the show was created and then a cast constructed, but it wasn't the cast they thought they were going to get. They were after various performers for Girl Crazy, some of whom couldn't be released for contractual reasons, some of whom walked out when other people were cast because the size of their part got changed, and various other things. And that's led to further changes in the keys of these numbers that obscure the relationship between the sources and what's actually performed or heard, which I think is perhaps a bit more unusual even than opera, but I appreciate that sense of continuous development in a stage work is probably quite different to a concert hall work in that sense.
Great, thank you. One thing you could, just giving a sort of a wonderful flavour of that is Berlioz's Evenings in the Orchestra, where he sort of laments about various changes happening, or things that to our ears and our sensibilities now would seem extraordinary.
Yeah,
it's
cool.
Very vividly portrayed.
Thank you.
Okay, has anybody else got any questions? Okay.
Thank you very much. That was absolutely fascinating, Ian. I'm interested when you talked about there not being a full score. So, as I understand it, if there was a full score for Girl Crazy in 1930, it was created by Robert Russell Bennett?
It was.
Was that simply a vehicle for creating band parts from? Would Gershwin have conducted off that full score at the first night, or would he have conducted off something else?
Again, I'm not sure. It's a bit unclear what the status of the full scores are, where they exist for these shows. It would certainly have been used as the basis for making the band parts. I think whether he conducted from it or not, I would just love for it to still exist. Even though it probably wouldn't represent the opening night. I think that's an important thing to say. If it was used, then it would have been developed potentially alongside the band parts through the course of the run and the tour. There is an account in Stephen Susskind's book which says that the full scores are at the Library of Congress, but sadly he's wrong, because they're the full scores. There are full scores for the Roxbury recording and for 1960, but not for 1930. I think full scores were sometimes used, but not always. But there's also no evidence of some sort of piano reduction score from 1930 either. So whatever it is that Gershwin used, or the MD going beyond that used, still doesn't survive. It's presumably with the band parts wherever they are, maybe under a golf course in Los Angeles somewhere, with most of the film music from that era, sadly. You all want to go to the bar, don't you?
Thanks, Ian. That was really interesting. Going back to the key relationships and the fact that they had to be changed for singers, do you have a sense that Gershwin was attempting anything particular in the key relationships? I mean, how significant were those for him, if at all?
I don't think they were significant at all. Again, in Feinstein's book, he talks about Ethel Merman's audition for Girl Crazy, because she was an unknown. She'd been heard singing in a club by one of the show's producers, Vincent Friedley, and brought to audition for Gershwin. She wasn't the original person cast in the part. Miss Barry was cast in the part and left at some point in August 1930. Apparently, Merman sang at her audition, and George Gershwin said to her, "If there's any part of any of the songs that you'd like me to change, just tell me and I'll change them." And she was so bowled over that the great Gershwin would change them that she said, "No, they're all perfect," and she then went and messed up I Got Rhythm. Sorry, that's just my interpretation. She then changed I Got Rhythm, but not immediately. So no, I don't think there's anything significant in it being in C and then being transposed to B flat, or even the key relationship going up a third and down a third. I suspect that the reason it doesn't come back down the third and goes from B flat to D flat and then only back to C into the original key Gershwin had the end in might be pragmatic, because perhaps all the chorus parts had already been prepared in that number, perhaps even learnt in that key, and it worked well and everything else. But that's only me hypothesizing.
I'll offer one other reflection there. The fact that you want to present an edition without the C's at the end of that piece. Some people it could frustrate. On the other hand, it offers an opportunity for a new singer to decide, I want to do something different here. It removes an accretion that becomes kind of a part of the text. And then there's opportunity for different sort of creativity of a singer to engage with that piece and do their own thing.
Well, also, while George Gershwin loved them, Ira Gershwin hated them, completely hated them. Again, there's another story from Feinstein where he says that one day he found a recording of Merman singing it and spliced it together, so she held the C for about 5 minutes and put it on for Ira. I've just found this, put it on. And eventually, after a couple of minutes, Ira walked out and sort of, enough, you win. So, yes, it restores it to what Ira would have preferred, even if George didn't. So. Well, the Padlet works.
Yeah, I've got a question here. At some point, the Gershwin presumably had an ideal version of the show. Does that version have any status?
It has some status, because the composer has some authority, but not all of the authority. I suspect if Gershwin had an ideal version of the show, it's never a version that got heard or performed. And it may have been the version that he wrote in the first place, but given that he was integrally involved, all the creators were integrally involved in the development of the show across July and August 1930 and then rehearsals in September, I think if there was an ideal version from George Gershwin's perspective, it was only that. It was just an ideal. It was never going to be a reality. And he was experienced enough by then, I would assume, to have realised that. I'm certainly not trying to create an ideal version of the show, nor am I trying to create the version that George Gershwin will have wanted, partly because he's been dead 90 years. I can't ask him. So it makes it more difficult to do that.
Great, thank you. That was the only question specifically online. I've just got a quick question. With other shows, you know, are there more remaining archival materials? Why do you think that this one in particular, there's such a scarcity of?
I think that I know from the press materials I've found and the documentation I've found that there were some issues with the tour. The show closed in June 1930, when Bert Lahr's contract expired. The producers decided to close the show at that point. It was quite common to close the show for the summer season anyway, but then it never reopened. And then there was meant to be a tour, and the Schuberts of Schubert Archive, not Schubert of classical music, had the rights to tour the show. And there appears to have been a tour to some Schubert theatres in late 1930, early 1931. There also appear to have been some illegal, or at least unauthorised performances that some of the creators, I think the book writers, had put on in other venues. There seems to have been some sort of legal challenge, people saying, you know, should we be suing them for this, should we be suing them for that? And the tour got pulled earlier than it was meant to finish. I suspect somewhere within all this kerfuffle, the materials have ended up getting misplaced, either because they were sent to another venue to which the show never arrived and at some point put somewhere and lost or burned or thrown away, or they just ended up never getting returned to the place they should have been. If anyone knows where they are, my address is... but I have looked everywhere I can think of, and I was lucky to talk to Michael Feinstein at a conference back in 2018. He suggested some places to look, but also suggested that if I tried the places I had and I looked in these other places and they weren't there, they probably didn't still survive. So I'm rolling with his authority there.
I have another question, one question, if I may, and it's about what you do in those moments where you're having to make a decision, an interpretation, and it's really tricky. Is it that you draw on your knowledge of his other works to make those decisions where it's really not clear cut? Do you go out for a walk and clear your head and come back and have a realization of what you should do? Or
you panic, basically just panic. Nikki, my wife, will tell you, because she's been in the room when I've been trying to make these decisions. I tend to sort of vocalize my frustration, shall we say. Yes, it is about context a lot of the time, where there isn't an obvious issue. So there's not clearly a C sharp in a chord, but it should be a C natural or something like that, and you can't just make a rapid correction. You do need to use the context of what's there. That might be one of the advantages of musicals, is they're quite repetitive. You may have noticed that if you've ever seen a musical. Verses tend to repeat, choruses tend to repeat, and whole songs tend to reprise. So that can be very helpful, because an apparent ambiguity when something comes up one time can be resolved in future iterations or past iterations. So using the context of the rest of the show is important. Trying to understand the composer's musical language. Looking through a range of sources, though, to try and understand how something may have developed and therefore got to the state you're looking at it in. There is a point in one of the songs, and I can't remember which one, where the orchestra modulates into one key using one rhythm, and the piano in the orchestra modulates into a different key using a different two-bar passage. And I still, for the life of me, can't work out how anyone can use these parts for performance. Maybe that's why it's never performed. But clearly, at some point, something hasn't been copied over. But trying to work out whether that's all the other band parts or just the piano parts then involves sort of looking back at piano vocal scores, looking for consistencies and inconsistencies. So yeah, it is a lot about context, understanding of style, even looking beyond this show, potentially looking beyond Gershwin, because the 1930s musicals are kind of a type when this sort of jazzy sound. So there's looking for markers effectively.
Well, it's obvious from the snippets of the work that you've been doing that you're taking an extremely careful approach to it. So I think everybody would join me in wishing you very well with the completion of the edition, and also thanking you for your excellent lecture today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bar's open.